Welcome back, America. Our next guest, a great man, retired U.S. General Keith Kellogg, former National Security Advisor to President Trump and Vice President Pence, former Chief of Staff of the U.S. National Security Council under President Trump, 1990 to 91, Chief of Staff for the 82nd Airborne during Operation Desert Storm, later Director of Command, Control, and Communications for U.S. Armed Forces, Distinguished Service Medal, Silver Star, several Bronze Stars. General Kellogg, first of all, thank you. We've heard a lot from President Biden and his surrogates in the media, where President Biden is blaming everybody but himself for what has now transpired in Afghanistan. He's blaming intelligence, he's blaming the military, he's blaming the Afghans, and he's blaming President Trump. Now, as for President Trump, you were there. President Trump dealt with the Taliban. But I also remember, General, he wasn't a pushover, and he wasn't an ideologue, a very practical, principled man. We saw that in Iraq, when Iran hit our forces in Iraq, what he did to Soleimani. We saw him take out the Caliphate, ISIS, and take out Baghdadi. We saw what he did in Syria as we were withdrawing, when they were gassing their own people. He hit them twice. We saw what he did in Afghanistan. He didn't rush to remove every single person out of Afghanistan. In fact, I remember a few years ago, he dropped one of the biggest bombs in our conventional arsenal on top of those people when they were organizing for another offensive against the Afghan soldiers and our soldiers. So what do you say to President Biden and his surrogates? Well, we just picked up the plan that Trump put together, and we had no choice.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for having me. That's absurd. Look, I spent 1,461 days in the White House, all of it involved in national security. I was there at the start when we talked about withdrawing from Afghanistan. And the reason we wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan was to intellectually and strategically pivot to face China, which was an emerging threat, and also with Russia. So for 2 years, we thought our way through it. And then the last 2 years, we went into the execution mode. Around 18 months ago, in February, we decided to come up with a plan. We came up with a plan on how to remove ourselves from Afghanistan in a very measured and gated way. What I mean by that is we came up with certain conditions as we went down the line, and when those conditions were met, we would continue to withdraw forces. So the final gate that we had, and we were going to meet, was an intra-Afghan agreement between the Taliban and the Ghani government, and we were going to have a government of reconciliation, and Ghani wouldn't have been there, to make sure we had an orderly transfer of power and with certain safeguards to make sure that government stayed as a coalition government going forward. To ensure that was going to happen, the president was personally engaged, something that Biden has not done. President Trump picked up the phone and called the chief negotiator for the Taliban, Mullah Baradar, who we had gotten out of a Pakistani jail for this very purpose, and explained to him what we were going to do. And he was talking to him in February of a year ago. That was a month after we had killed Soleimani. He got the message. And the president, as only President Trump can do, talked about it in very Trumpian terms, which meant if you violate this agreement, we know where you live, and we will come and find you. He did the same thing to Ghani going forward as well. So that plan with the gates was intended to withdraw in an orderly way and a good end state, an end state that would have a fully functioning Afghanistan with the protections of its citizens. It may have been a coalition government, and it may have not been pretty, but it would have worked. Let me say something else about how Trump works this. At one time, well over a year ago, he said, why don't I bring the Taliban and the Ghani government back into Camp David? And people kind of fell on the floor. And I said, you know, he had a good point. I mean, this actually happened with the Camp David Accords when you brought back Menachem Begin and you brought in Anwar Sadat, and they spent 12 days at Camp David until they hammered out an agreement. We were kind of doing the same thing. So there was a process in place. There was a plan in place. There was not a precipitous retreat that you see today in place. And we were led by a very informed and hard decision maker in President Trump. That's not what you see today. What you're seeing today is nothing less than a national debacle.
You know, General, the other thing is this. Did your plan include pulling out military forces before pulling out American citizens?
No.
What kind of plan is that?
Well, to start with, it's not a plan, Mark, at all. That's not how you do it. And to start with, we had that last condition. We weren't going to pull those last forces out. We had 2,500 troops on the ground, and that was an agreement between Chairman Milley and Gina Haspel, because she had about 3,500 paramilitary, that we were going to hold at that number, and we were going to hold with our aircraft. We were going to maintain Bagram Air Base until those agreements were made. We weren't moving. We set 1 May as a forcing function. Could it have shifted to the right? Of course it could, until those conditions were met. And we told Baradar that. The president was very clear with him. He understood that. We told Ghani that. Very clear how we were going to go. And if you had a withdrawal like this, and we would have never done that way. We would have protected Americans, and they would have gone out, the citizens would have gone out first.
We don't know how many American citizens are left there now. I hear anything from 13,000 to 15,000 to maybe 20,000. We have men and women who worked with us, tens of thousands. You see these horrific video of women throwing their children and babies over the fence. I just can't imagine. And then you see the Taliban has not changed at all.
Yeah.
If President Trump were still there, based on what you know and the advice you gave him and so forth, and the man I know and know very, very well, I don't think he would have tolerated that for 1 second. He didn't tolerate the Syrians gassing their own people, where he could have said that's none of our business. He said that is our business, and I'm not putting up with that. And he moved heaven and earth to get 1 American out of a kidnapped situation, or 2 Americans out of a kidnapped situation. I don't think President Trump would have been afraid to pull triggers all over the place when it comes to the military in order to get American citizens out of Afghanistan. What do you say?
No, I know that for a fact. I was with him in the Oval Office. As I said, I spent all 4 years there. I saw President Trump in crisis situations. I saw his resolve. You didn't screw around with an American, or we were coming after you. I saw a lot of times. We did it with Soleimani. We did it with Baghdadi. And as you mentioned there, when sarin nerve gas was used by the Syrians against their own citizens, he said, you're violating international norms. We went after him. He wasn't afraid to do it at all. And he did it. And I was there with him, and I was proud to be with him when he did it. But he was a man of force. And may not like his tweets, but you had to admire his courage. And you had to admire how he made decisions, which were hard.
I think we'll take his tweets over what we see today. I'll be right back.